Very distinguished and honorable members of the National Assembly, good afternoon to all of us. Before we start the business of the day today, like always, we'll seek the intervention of the Almighty God. To lead us in the Christian prayers will be very distinguished Senator Michael Openi Bamidele of Ekiti Central. And thereafter, the Muslim prayers will be led by Honorable Maki Eleman from Jigawa State. Distinguished Senator Michael Openi Bamidele. Right Honorable Speaker, very distinguished and honored members of the National Assembly, the business of the day will now start. Your Excellency, Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Federal Republic of Nigeria. Your Excellency, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, SAN, GCON. Right Honorable Speaker, my brother, Right Honorable Femi Bajabia Miller, the Deputy President of the Senate and the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, all the principal officers of the National Assembly, very distinguished senators and honor members, excellencies, executive governors here present, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, the Chief of Staff to the President, members of the Federal Executive Council, Head of Civil Service of the Federation, members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Chairman of the National Assembly Service Commission and its commissioners, Clerk to the National Assembly, the Deputy Clerk to the National Assembly, Clerk, Senate, and Clerk, House of Representatives, Secretaries of Directorates in the National Assembly, Head of Security Agencies present, Head of Federal Government Agencies and Parastatals, National Assembly Management Staff, invited guests, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I welcome you and your entourage on behalf of all my colleagues, distinguished senators, and honored members of the House of Representatives to the third joint session of the 9th National Assembly for the presentation of the 2022 Appropriation Bill. Your Excellency, on Thursday, 8th October 2020, you led before this August Assembly the 2021 Appropriation Bill, which was the second in the life of this 9th National Assembly. Today, 7th October 2021, you will be laying the 2022 Appropriation Bill. Mr. President, I commend you for maintaining this trajectory of presenting the annual budget estimates before the joint sitting of the National Assembly in good time to enable the Assembly work on the bill. Mr. President, members of the 9th National Assembly have kept to their promise of passing the annual appropriation bill before the end of the year to ensure that the bill is signed into law before the beginning of the new year. The 2020 and 2021 appropriation bills were considered and passed before the end of each year. The distinguished and honored members of the National Assembly remain committed to working on the 2022 appropriation bill and pass it before the end of this year. Mr. President, the Nigerian economy and indeed our citizens are benefiting from the early passage and assent to the 2020 and 2021 appropriation bills now acts. We all recall that the 2020 budget was fully implemented, becoming the first and only budget that was implemented 100% since the Fourth Republic began. This no doubt has helped our country to deal with the economic recession that we faced as occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, unlike many other countries, Nigeria was able to come out of the recession due to the ability of this administration to deploy the resources to support the economy. Mr. President, the second quarter GDP report released by the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, Nigeria's gross domestic product GDP increased by 5.01% in the second quarter of 2021, the strongest growth since first quarter of 2014. Is a trajectory that we need to sustain. Your Excellency, the implementation of the 2021 Appropriation Act so far indicates that it is possible to achieve the feat of the 2020 budget implementation. We must therefore work assiduously to continue with that momentum. Mr. President, the 2021 budget and indeed the 2020 budget provided for significant infrastructure development across the country. It is imperative that we prioritize the completion of ongoing projects on the development of infrastructure in our country. The 2022 budget should target at completion and consolidation of the projects already started. Your Excellency, generating and collecting revenues have remained major challenges in our quest for development. The recent efforts by the National Assembly as well as the Executive to challenge the revenue-generating agencies is a step in the right direction. Equally important is the recent position taken by the legislature and the executive arms of government to insist on zero allocation to MDS that failed to remit their revenues for the 2022 appropriation. This saw an increase in the contribution of MDS by over 400 billion. It is my view that MDS can contribute to the Federation account much more than that. This policy should be expanded and deepened to cover more MDS. Mr. President, the need to enhance revenue generation and collection cannot be overemphasized. The level of budget deficit is high, and both the legislature and the executive should work to reduce this deficit through the availability of more revenues. I must commend the Senate and House Committees on Finance and Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning for working together to improve the level of revenues for this administration. Mr. President, we understand that due to paucity of revenues, the federal government has to resort to borrowing funds from both foreign and domestic sources to provide infrastructure across the country. That is why the National Assembly approved the request for borrowing. The commitment of the federal government.
Speaker, House of Representatives, principal officers, and members of the National Assembly, executive governors, members of the Federal Executive Council, party leaders, and officials here present, senior government officials, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to be here once again to present the 2022 federal budget proposals to this distinguished joint session of the National Assembly. Distinguished and honorable leaders and members of the National Assembly, let me start by commending you for the expeditious consideration and passage of the Supplementary Appropriation Bill 2021. This further underscores your commitment to our collective efforts to contain the COVID-19 pandemic and address the various security challenges facing our country. I will also take this opportunity to thank you for the quick consideration and approval of the 2022 to 2024 Medium Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper. Our hope is that the National Assembly will continue to partner with the Executive by ensuring that they are completed before the Appropriation Act can come into effect by the 1st of January 2022. The 2022 budget will be the last budget to be implemented by this administration. We designed it to build on the achievements of previous budgets and to deliver on our goals and aspirations as will be reflected in our soon-to-be launched National Development Plan of 21 to 2025. Distinguished senators and honorable members, in these normal times, I made use of this opportunity to provide an overview of global and domestic developments in the current year, a summary of our achievements and our plans for the next fiscal year. However, these are exceptional times. The grim realities of COVID-19 and its lethal variants are still upon us. From president to pauper, the virus does not discriminate. This is why our country still maintains its COVID-19 guidelines and protocols in place to protect its citizens and stop the spread of this disease. Over the past few days, we have consulted with the Presidential Steering Committee on COVID-19 and the leadership of the National Assembly on how best to present the 2022 budget proposal, keeping in mind the deep-rooted traditions in place and the guidelines for safe mass gatherings. We ultimately decided that the most responsible and respectful approach was to hold a shorter than usual gathering while allowing the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning to provide fuller details of our proposals in a smaller event. I am sure many of you will be relieved as my last budget speech in October 2020 lasted over 50 minutes. Still, over the next few minutes, I will provide key highlights of our 2021 performance as well as our proposals for 2022. The 2021 budget economic recovery and resilience is based on a benchmark oil price of $40 per barrel, oil production of 1.86 million barrels per day, and exchange rate of 379 naira to United States dollar. Furthermore, a supplementary budget of 982.73 billion naira was recently enacted to address issues in the security and health sectors. Based on 2021 fiscal framework, total revenue of 8.12 trillion naira was projected to fund aggregate federal expenditure of 14.57 trillion naira, inclusive of the supplementary budget. The projected fiscal deficit of 6.45 trillion naira, or 4.52% of GDP, is expected to be financed mainly by domestic and external borrowing. By July 2021, Nigeria's daily oil production averaged 1.7 million barrels, inclusive of condensates, and the market price of Bonny light crude averaged $68.53 United dollars per barrel. Accordingly, actual revenue were 34% below target as of July 2021, mainly due to the underperformance of oil and gas revenue sources. Federal government's retained revenues, excluding government-owned enterprises, amounted to 2.61 trillion naira against the proportionate target of 3.95 trillion naira for the period. The federal government's share of oil revenue totaled 570.23 billion naira as of July 2021, which was 51% below target, while non-oil tax revenues totaled 964.13 billion naira. The poor performance of oil revenue relative to the budget was largely due to the shortfall in production as well as significant cost recovery by NNPC to cover the shortfall between its cost of importing petrol and the pump price. The National Assembly will recall that in March 2020, the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency announced that the price of petrol would henceforth be determined by market forces. However, as a combination of rising crude oil prices and exchange rate combine to push the price above the hitherto regulated price of 145 naira per litre, opposition against the policy of price deregulation hardened on the part of labor unions in particular. The government had to suspend further upward price adjustments while engaging labor on the subject. This petrol subsidy significantly eroded revenues that should have been available to fund the budget. On the positive note, we surpassed the non-oil taxes target by 7% in aggregate. The sustained improvement in non-oil taxes indicates that some of our revenue reforms are yielding positive results. We expect further improvement in revenue collections later in the year as more cooperative entities file their tax returns and we accelerate the implementation of our revenue reforms. We have stepped up implementation of the strengthened framework for performance management of government-owned enterprises with a view to improve their operational efficiencies, revenue generation, and accountability. The 50% cost-to-income ratio imposed on the government-owned enterprises in the Finance Act 2020 has contributed significantly to rationalizing wasteful expenditures by several government-owned enterprises and enhance the level of operating surpluses to be transferred to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. I solicit the cooperation of the National Assembly in enforcing the cost-to-income ratio and other prudential guidelines during your consideration of the budget proposals of the government-owned enterprises, which I am also laying before you today. On expenditure side, as at the end of July 2021, a total of 60.79 trillion naira had been spent as against the prorated expenditure of 7.91 trillion naira. Accordingly, a deficit of 4.17 trillion naira was recorded as at the end of July 2021. The deficit was financed through domestic borrowing. Despite our revenue challenges, we have consistently met our debt service commitments. We are also up to date on the payment of staff salaries, statutory transfers, and overhead costs. As at 4th of October 2021, a total of 1.732 trillion naira had been released for capital expenditure. I am pleased to inform you that we expect to fund MDA's capital budget fully by the end of fiscal year 2021. Capital releases thus far have been prioritized in favor of critical ongoing infrastructural projects in the power, roads, rail, agriculture, health, and education sectors. We have made progress in the railway projects connecting different parts of the country. I am glad to report that the Lagos-Ibadan line is now completed and operational. The Abuja-Kaduna line is running efficiently. The Itape-Ajakuta rail line was finally completed and commissioned over 30 years after its initiation. Arrangements are underway to complete the Ibadan-Kano line. Also, work will soon commence on the Port Harcourt-Maiduguri line and Calabar-Lagos coastal line, which will connect the southern and eastern states to themselves and to the north. Progress is also being made on several power generation, transmission, and distribution projects, as well as off-grid solutions, all aimed towards achieving the national goal of optimizing power supply by 2025. I am again happy to report that we continue to make visible progress in our strategic road construction projects like the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Apapa to Oronsoki Expressway, Abuja to Kano Expressway, East-West Road, and the second Niger Bridge. We hope to commission most of these projects before the end of tenure in 2023. The pandemic reveals the urgent need to strengthen our health system. Towards this end, we constructed 52 molecular labs, 520-bed intensive care units, 52 isolation centers, and provision of personal protective equipment across 52 federal medical centers and teaching hospitals. We continue to push our expenditure rationalization initiatives, which we commenced in 2016. For example, on personnel costs, the number of MDAs captured on the integrated payroll and personal information system increased from 459 in 2017 to 711 to date. The recent passage of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 and consequent incorporation of Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation should also result in rationalization of expenditure as well as increased investments and improved output in the oil and gas industry. Distinguished senators and honorable members, you will agree with me that a lot has been accomplished over the last year, but there is still much to be done. I will now proceed with the review of the 2022 budget proposal. The allocation of MDAs were guided by the strategic objectives of the National Development Plan of 2021 to 2025, which are A, diversifying the economy with robust MSME growth, B, investing in critical infrastructure, C, strengthening security and ensuring good governance, D, enabling a vibrant, educated, and healthy populace, E, reducing poverty, and F, minimizing regional, economic, and social disparities. The 2022 appropriation, therefore, is a budget of economic growth and sustainability. Defense and internal security will continue to be our top priority. We remain property nationwide. We will continue to ensure that our gallant men and women in the armed forces, police, and paramilitary units are properly equipped and well motivated. The 2022 budget is also the first in our history where MDAs were clearly advised on gender-responsive budgeting. These are part of critical steps in our efforts to distribute resources fairly and reach vulnerable groups in our society. Distinguished members of the National Assembly, the 2022 and 2024 Medium Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper set out the parameters for the 2022 budget as follows. A conservative oil price benchmark of $57 per barrel. B, daily oil production estimate of 1.88 million barrels, including condensates of 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day. C, exchange rate of 410 naira and 10 naira 15 kobo per United States dollar, and D, projected GDP growth rate of 4.2% and 13% inflation rate. Based on these fiscal assumptions and parameters, total federally collectible revenue is estimated to 17.7 trillion naira in 2022. Total federally contributable revenue is estimated to 12.72 trillion naira in 2022. Total revenue available to fund the 2022 federal budget is estimated at 10.13 trillion naira. This includes grants and aid of 63.38 billion naira, as well as the revenue of 63 government-owned enterprises. Oil revenue is projected at 3.16 trillion naira. Non-oil taxes are estimated at 2.13 trillion naira, and federal government independent revenues are projected to be 1.82 trillion naira. A total expenditure of 16.39 trillion naira is proposed for the federal government in 2022. The proposed expenditure comprises A, statutory transfers of 768.28 billion naira. B, non-debt recurrent costs of 6.8 trillion naira. And C, personnel costs of 4.1 trillion naira. D, pensions, gratuities, and retirees' benefits of 577 billion naira. E, overheads of 792.39 billion naira. And F, capital expenditure of 5.35 trillion naira, including the capital component of statutory transfers. G, debt service of 3.61 trillion naira. And H, sinking fund of 290.71 billion naira to retire certain maturing bonds. We expect the total fiscal operations of the federal government to result in a deficit of 6.26 trillion naira. This represents 3.39% of estimated GDP, slightly above the 3% threshold set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. Countries around the world have, of necessity, overshoot their fiscal threshold for the promises to survive and thrive. We need to exceed this threshold, considering our collective desire to continue tracking existential security challenges facing our country. We plan to finance the deficit mainly by new borrowings, totaling 5.01 trillion naira, 90.73 billion naira for privatization proceeds and 1.16 trillion naira drawdowns on loans secured for social development projects. Some have expressed concern over our resort to borrowing to finance our fiscal gaps. They are right to be concerned. However, we believe that the debt level of the federal government is still within sustainable limits. Borrowing at specific strategic projects and can be verified publicly. As we are aware, we have witnessed 2 economic recessions within the period of this administration. In both cases, we had to spend our way out of recession, which necessitated a resort to growing the public debt. It is unlikely that our recovery from each of the 2 recessions would have grown as fast without the sustained government expenditure funded by debt. Our target over the medium term is to grow our revenue to GDP ratio from about 8% currently to 15% by 2025. At that level of revenue, the debt service to revenue ratio will cease to be worrying. Put simply, we do not have a debt sustainability problem, but a revenue challenge which we are determined to tackle to ensure our debt remain sustainable. Very importantly, we have endeavored to use the loans to finance critical development projects and programs aimed at improving our economic environment and ensuring effective delivery of public services to our people. We focused on A, the completion of major road and rail projects, B, the effective implementation of power sector projects, C, the provision of potable water, D, construction of irrigation infrastructure and dams across the country, and E, critical health projects such as the strengthening of national emergency medical services and the ambulance system, procurement of vaccines, polio eradication, and upgrading primary health care centers across the 6 geopolitical zones. In 2022, government will further strengthen the framework for concessions and public-private partnerships. Capital projects that are good candidates for PPP by their nature will be developed for private sector participation. We will also explore available opportunities in existing ecosystem for green finance, including the implementation of our sovereign green bond program and leveraging debt for climate swap mechanisms. Our strategies to improve revenue mobilization will be sustained in 2022 with the goal of achieving the following objectives. A, enhance tax and excise revenue through policy reforms and tax administration measures. B, review the policy effectiveness of tax waivers and concessions. C, boost customs revenue through the e-customs and single window initiatives. And D, safeguard revenues from oil and gas sector. Distinguished senators and honorable members, I commend you for passage of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. It is my hope that the implementation of the law will boost confidence in our economy and attract substantial investments in the sector. In line with our plan to accompany annual budget with finance bills, partly to support the realization of fiscal projections, current tax and fiscal laws are being reviewed to produce a draft finance bill 2022. It is our intention that our ongoing consultations are completed. The finance bill would be submitted to the National Assembly to be considered alongside the 2022 appropriation bill. Mr. Senate President, Mr. Speaker, distinguished honorable members of the National Assembly, this speech would be incomplete without commending the immense patriotic and collective support of the National Assembly in the effort to deliver socio-economic development and democracy dividends for our people. I wish to assure you of the strong commitment of the executive to strengthen the relationship with the National Assembly. Nigeria is currently emerging from a very difficult economic challenge. We must continue to cooperate and ensure that our actions are aimed at accelerating the pace of economic recovery so that we can achieve economic prosperity and deliver on our promises to Nigerian people. The fiscal year 2022 is very crucial to our efforts to ensure that critical projects are completed, put to use, and improve the general conditions of our people. It is with great pleasure, therefore, that I lay before this distinguished joint session of the National Assembly the 2022 budget proposal of the federal government of Nigeria. I thank you most sincerely for your attention. May God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that well-delivered speech and the laying of the 2022 budget estimates. Distinguished and honorable members of the National Assembly, the next item on the order paper is the vote of thanks and remarks by the Right Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Femi Bajaba-Mila. Right Honorable Speaker.
His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Professor Yemi Osinbajo, GCON Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, Distinguished Senator Ahmed Lawan, President of the Senate, Chairman of the National Assembly, Deputy President of the Senate and Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Principal Officers of the Senate and House of Representatives, distinguished senators and honorable members of the House of Representatives. In the interest of time, please permit me to stand on the protocol as already established. Good afternoon, and thank you all once more for being here today. On behalf of the members and staff of the National Assembly, I have the honor of extending our sincere appreciation to His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, for coming to the National Assembly today to present the appropriation bill and to seek the approval of Parliament as the Constitution demands. Unfortunately, we are still contending with the deadly and evolving COVID-19 pandemic, and the guidelines regarding the duration and size of public gatherings limits the time we can spend here together today. So today's budget presentation is somewhat abridged in the interest of public health. Yet, we have sufficient time to say the things that need to be communicated to further the best interests of our beloved country. When we resumed the 9th Assembly, we committed to pursuing long-awaited and critical reforms to the appropriation process to ensure that we are better able to deliver on the promise of our national development. Over the last two budget cycles, by the joint effort of the executive and the legislature, we have made significant progress in this regard and achieved reforms that will stand the test of time and count in our favor. These reforms, including establishing a January to December budget cycle, improving oversight procedures, and ensuring greater fidelity to the letter and spirit of our appropriation laws, have led to the measurable improvements in public infrastructure, access to education and housing, healthcare, and transportation, among other things. These improvements of global trade, the challenges of cross-border insecurity, and the increasing interdependence of nations, each and together, continue to present challenges we must overcome and opportunities we must embrace. Therefore, as legislators and leaders in government, we have continued obligation to ensure that in considering this appropriation bill, we make all deliberate efforts to ensure that we continue to make critical investments in education, healthcare, public infrastructure, and national security. Through these investments, we can hope to build an economy that provides enough well-paying jobs for our young population so that we can, in our lifetime, end endemic poverty in our country and eradicate the social ills that derive therefrom. Let me express my profound gratitude to the senators and members of the House of Representatives who have, through the budget cycles, shown an unmatched determination to delivering the annual budget on time, in line with our commitment to a January to December budget cycle. I have seen legislators working through the day and night, forgoing all other considerations in a joint effort to deliver a national budget that meets the highest expectations of the Nigerian people. Therefore, I am confident that the National Assembly will give the appropriation bill the prompt consideration it demands. And for the next 2 to 3 months, will be for the strictest scrutiny of the budget estimates. However, let me also use this opportunity to say to the heads of ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government of Nigeria that the determination of the National Assembly to deliver a timely budget will not derogate from our responsibility to ensure exhaustive consideration of the bill. We will demand a thorough accounting for the funds previously appropriated, disbursed, and expended. And we will take steps to hold to account those who fail to provide the records we need to make informed decisions on the appropriation bill. This is the responsibility of the National Assembly, and we will live up to it. Over the past year, the House has passed several important resolutions relating to healthcare access, primary education, rural infrastructure deficits, and national security that require actual funding. Where these restrictions have not been included in the appropriation bill, the House will work with the Senate and the Executive to see that the final version of this appropriation bill includes necessary allocations to implement these resolutions and give full effect to the best wishes of the House. I thank His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, the Budget Office, Honorable Ministers, and all those who contributed to the drafting of this appropriation bill. The National Assembly will build on your efforts. Together, we will deliver an appropriation act that provides real solutions to national problems, unlocks economic potential, secures our country, and brings a future we can all look forward to and be proud of. Finally, let me appreciate the clerk to the National Assembly, Architect Olatunde Ojo, and the entire management and staff whose efforts have made this joint session a resounding success. And I thank all of you who have presented yourselves to this hallowed chamber to participate in this fundamental democratic tradition. May God keep and guide us all, and may God bless our Federal Republic.
The National Anthem.
Thanks for checking out SYMFONI on YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe and like our videos for updates.